Let me ask you something. Have you ever replayed the same conversation in your mind again and again? Have you ever thought about a decision so much that you felt tired but still didn't act? Have you ever imagined many possible problems even when nothing has happened yet? If your answer is yes, you are not alone. Today, we're going to talk about something that affects millions of people every day: overthinking. Why do we do it? Why is it so hard to stop? And more importantly, what is it doing to our minds and our lives? Today, we have a very special guest. He's a psychologist and researcher who specializes in anxiety, decision making, and cognitive behavior. He has studied how human brain processes uncertainty, fear, and information overload. Today, he will help us understand why we overthink everything and what we can do about it. Thank you very much for being here today. Thank you. I'm happy, very happy to be here because overthinking is one of the most common psychological patterns I see in my work. And the interesting thing is this: many people believe overthinking is a sign of intelligence. They think, I think a lot, so I am careful. I analyze everything, so I make better decisions. But in reality, overthinking often does the opposite. It creates confusion, stress, and in many cases, inaction. That is very interesting. So, overthinking is not always helpful, even if people believe it is. Exactly. Let's start with a simple definition. Overthinking is when your mind repeats the same thoughts again and again without reaching a clear conclusion or action. It is not the same as thinking. Thinking helps you solve problems. Overthinking keeps you trapped in the problem. Now, I want to explain something important from a scientific perspective. Our brain has a natural function to protect us. Thousands of years ago, humans needed to constantly analyze their environment to survive. They needed to ask, is this safe? Is there danger? What could go wrong? This ability helped humans survive in dangerous environments. But today, the world is different. We are not usually in physical danger, but our brain still works in the same way. So, instead of asking, is there a tiger? We ask, what if I fail? What if they judge me? What if I make a mistake? The brain is still trying to protect us, but now it is protecting us from social and emotional threats. So, overthinking is connected to survival, but in a modern context. Exactly. And here's where the problem begins. The brain does not always know the difference between real danger and imagined danger. For example, imagine a student who wants to speak English in public. There is no real physical danger, but the brain starts creating scenarios. What if I say something wrong? What if people laugh? What if I look stupid? The body reacts as if something dangerous is happening. Heart rate increases, muscles become tense, the person feels anxious. This creates a loop. thought, emotion, more thoughts, more emotion. This loop is one of the main mechanisms behind overthinking. That explains why overthinking feels so intense, even when nothing is actually happening. Exactly. Now, let me explain another important concept: cognitive overload. Today, we live in a world full of information. Every day, we consume social media, news, messages, videos, opinions. The brain receives more information than ever before in human history. And when the brain has too much information, it tries to process everything. This can create confusion. For example, imagine someone trying to make a simple decision, like choosing a career or starting a business. They watch many videos, they read many opinions, they compare many options. Instead of becoming clear, they become more confused. This is called analysis paralysis. Too much thinking leads to no action. That is something many people experience today. They have too many options and too much information. Yes, and this creates mental noise. When the mind is full of noise, it becomes difficult to hear your own thoughts clearly. Now, I want to talk about another cause of overthinking: the need to control. Many people overthink because they want to control the future. They want to predict everything. They want to avoid mistakes. They want to feel safe. But here is the reality: the future is uncertain. No matter how much you think, you cannot control everything. So, what happens? The mind keeps searching for certainty, but never finds it. And this creates more thinking. So, overthinking is also connected to uncertainty. Yes. And this leads to another important factor: perfectionism. Perfectionism is the belief that everything must be done perfectly. People who have this mindset often think, I need the perfect decision. I need the perfect plan. I need to avoid mistakes. So they think more and more and more. But the more they think, the more they see possible problems. And this creates fear. So instead of acting, they delay. That explains why some people never start things. They are waiting for the perfect moment. Exactly. But perfection is not realistic. And waiting for perfection often leads to inaction. Now, let me share a real example from one of my patients. He was a young professional who wanted to change careers. He spent months thinking about it. He made lists of pros and cons. He watched many videos. He asked many people for advice. But after 6 months, nothing changed. When I asked him why he had not made a decision, he said, I'm still thinking. But in reality, he was not moving forward. He was trapped in thinking. After some sessions, we discovered something important. He was not overthinking because he needed more information. He was overthinking because he was afraid of making the wrong decision. That is powerful. So sometimes overthinking is not about thinking, it is about fear. Yes, that's correct. And this is something very important to understand. Overthinking often looks like logic, but it is driven by emotion, fear, insecurity, and doubt. Now, let's talk about the consequences of overthinking. Because many people believe overthinking is harmless, but it has real effects. First, it creates mental exhaustion. Thinking all the time uses a lot of energy. People feel tired, even if they did nothing physically. Second, it creates stress and anxiety. The mind keeps imagining negative scenarios. The body reacts as if those scenarios are real. Third, it reduces decision making ability. When you think too much, every option starts to look risky. So decisions become harder. And finally, it creates inaction. People stay in the same place, not because they cannot move, but because they are stuck in their own thoughts. That is very interesting and also a little scary because many people live like that every day. Yes, and the most dangerous part is that overthinking feels productive. People feel like they are doing something important, but in reality, they are not moving forward. This conversation is very deep. We talked about the brain's survival system, cognitive overload, the need for control, perfectionism, and the emotional side of overthinking. Now, I would like to explore something more important, something very important. How can people stop overthinking? What practical strategies can they use in daily life? That is the key question, because understanding overthinking is the first step, but learning how to manage it is what truly changes people's lives. Now we can explore practical techniques, mental strategies, and daily habits that can help people reduce overthinking and take action. Yes, I would like to move into something very important. How can we reduce overthinking in real life? Not in theory, but in daily situations. That is the most important part because understanding overthinking is helpful, but changing it requires specific actions. And I want to start with something that may surprise many people. The first strategy is do not try to stop your thoughts. Many people think the solution is to eliminate thoughts completely, but that is not how the brain works. When you try to stop a thought, the brain often does the opposite. It brings the thought back even stronger. This is known in psychology as the rebound effect. For example, if I tell you, do not think about a red car, immediately your brain imagines a red car. So instead of fighting thoughts, a more effective strategy is to change your relationship with them. You can observe your thoughts without reacting to them. For example, instead of thinking, this thought is a problem, you can say, this is just a thought, not a fact. This simple shift reduces the emotional power of the thought. That is interesting. So the goal is not to control thoughts, but to observe them differently. Now, let's talk about another powerful method supported by research, externalizing your thoughts. When thoughts stay inside your mind, they often become bigger and more confusing. But when you take them out by writing or speaking, they become clearer. For example, I often tell my patients to write their thoughts on paper, not in a perfect way, Just write everything. When you see your thoughts outside your mind, something interesting happens. You start to notice patterns. You realize that some thoughts repeat. You see that many fears are exaggerated. And sometimes you discover that the problem is not as complex as it felt. Writing creates distance between you and your thoughts, and that distance reduces overthinking. That makes sense. When thoughts stay in the mind, they feel bigger than they really are. Yes. Now, I want to introduce another concept from cognitive science: decision fatigue. The brain has limited energy for making decisions. Every decision uses mental resources. So, if you make too many decisions during the day, your brain becomes tired. When the brain is tired, it becomes more vulnerable to overthinking. Simple decisions become difficult. Small problems feel bigger. This is why many successful people simplify their daily routines. They reduce unnecessary decisions. For example, they wear similar clothes every day. They follow fixed routines. They plan their day in advance. This reduces mental load. When the brain has less noise, it can focus better on important decisions. So, reducing small decisions can actually help reduce overthinking. Yes, another powerful strategy is related to something called cognitive diffusion, which comes from acceptance and commitment therapy. This may sound complex, but the idea is simple. Instead of believing every thought, you learn to see thoughts as mental events, not reality. For example, instead of thinking, I am going to fail, you can say, I am having the thought that I might fail. This small change creates psychological distance. You are no longer inside the thought, you are observing the thought. And when you observe something, it has less control over you. This technique has been studied and used in therapy for many years, and it is very effective for reducing anxiety and overthinking. That is very interesting. It feels like creating a space between you and your mind. Exactly. Now, let's talk about something physical, not only mental. The body plays a very important role in overthinking. When the body is in a state of tension, the mind becomes more active. When the body is relaxed, the mind becomes calmer. This is why techniques like slow breathing are very effective. Scientific studies show that slow, controlled breathing can reduce activity in the stress response system. For example, breathing slowly for a few minutes can reduce heart rate, calm the nervous system, lower anxiety levels. When the body calms down, the mind follows. This is not just a psychological idea, it is a biological response. So, controlling the body can help control the mind. Exactly. Now, I want to talk about something that many people ignore. Action reduces overthinking. Thinking often creates more thinking, but action interrupts that cycle. When you take action, even a small action, the brain shifts from imagination to reality. For example, imagine someone who wants to start a project but keeps thinking about it. if they take one small step, like writing the first idea, making one call, or creating a simple version, the mental loop changes. The brain receives new information from reality, and this reduces uncertainty. In psychology, we call this behavioral activation. It is a proven method used in therapy to reduce anxiety and overthinking. That is very practical. So instead of thinking more, people should act more. Exactly. And the action does not need to be perfect, it only needs to exist. Now, I want to share a deeper idea. Overthinking often comes from the belief that we must feel ready before we act. But in reality, action often creates clarity, not the opposite. Many people wait to feel confident, certain, and prepared. But those feelings often appear after action, not before. So, one of the most powerful mindset changes is this: you do not need to feel ready to begin. You only need to begin. That is a very strong message. Yes. And I would like to end with a reflection. Imagine two people. The first person thinks about everything. They analyze, plan, and imagine many scenarios, but they rarely act. The second person also thinks, but they act despite uncertainty. They make mistakes, learn, and continue. After 5 years, their lives will look very different. Not because one is more intelligent, but because one decided to move while the other stayed in thought. So, here is my final message for the listeners. Your mind is a powerful tool, but if you are not careful, it can also become a prison. You are not your thoughts. You are the person who can observe them, question them, and choose what to do next. Overthinking will always try to keep you safe, but growth happens when you move forward, even when you feel uncertain. That is an incredible way to end this conversation. Thank you very much for sharing this insight. I think many people will start seeing their thoughts in a different way after this. And to everyone listening, you don't need to think less. You need to live more, act more, and trust the process. Thank you for listening to this English podcast. Keep learning, keep growing, and we will see you in the next episode. Thank you, everyone. And remember, your life changes not when your thoughts are perfect, but when your actions begin. See you next time.